When I started this channel, I didn't know what to expect, and even though my growth has been very slow, especially these last couple weeks, knowing that there are people who seem to care enough to take the time to watch my videos has been very uplifting. So whether you've been here since the very beginning, or if this is the first time watching one of my videos, thank you. And on that note, let's begin. The internet has been rampant with debate about whether it's okay to punch a Nazi or not. I fall on the side of people who say that it's not okay. Now, of course, I'm not saying we should never use force. Obviously, if someone is posing a threat to someone else, for example, if someone brings a weapon to a rally with the intent of getting into a fight, then they pose a danger to the people around them, regardless of whether they're a Nazi or not. So if someone is posing a threat to someone else by exhibiting a pattern of violence or making threats, then they should be met with force. However, I think it's the police's job to handle it. But I also don't want a police state. I don't want the government to crack down on political rallies because I think this will harm free speech. So I think it would be best for the police not to crack down on rallies. But the only way for that to work is for there to be little to no violence, and the best way to accomplish that, I think, is to just not go. If the Nazis or so-called Nazis don't show up, then Antifa will have no one to fight. If, on the other hand, Antifa and the counter-protesters don't show up, then the other side will have no one to fight. And then, if they get violent, it'll just be them and the police, with little to no innocent people in the way. However, not showing up means not exercising the right to free speech. Or does it? According to Gizmodo, rallies in 36 states have been canceled and set up as online demonstrations. The article is pretty much trash, but the information's all I care about. The article itself paints this as a bad thing, claiming that the so-called Nazis are scared and outnumbered, which it's true that they have been outnumbered in the past and almost certainly would be outnumbered in the future, but there's a lot to consider here. First, not all demonstrations are organized by the same people. While Charlottesville was an alt-right rally, many other free speech rallies, like the one in Portland a couple months ago, have had little to no white nationalists, and no one openly waving swastikas or Confederate flags. So some of the organizers probably wanted the ability to show their support for free speech, but didn't want to be violent. They didn't want the opportunity for the rally to be hijacked by racists. While this approach isn't ideal, they likely saw it as a compromise. This way, they get to exercise free speech, but also won't be held accountable for any violence that is neither committed by nor condoned by them. And I think we should consider this a good thing. I don't see why anyone would try and paint this as a bad thing when it's clear that at least some people are trying to fight for free speech while also distancing themselves from Nazis and violence. Regardless of that, I think neo-Nazis and the alt-right have already done a huge disservice to free speech. The violence in Charlottesville was inexcusable, the slogans being shouted only served to push people away, and the open and proud display of Nazi symbols like swastikas helped cement the idea in the minds of some liberals that most, if not all, right-wingers are Nazi or Nazi sympathizers, which is untrue, but we'll get back to that in a moment. But why not punch a Nazi? I mean, they are terrible people, right? Well, I think there's two reasons that I'm against punching Nazis. The first is that I think it's pointless. Punching someone doesn't change their mind. So if someone needs to be stopped, then they should be dealt with by the police, not individuals seeking retribution through vigilantism. If, however, you have proof that they're going to hurt someone, then it's your duty to report it. However, if you think you have proof, and then you give that evidence to the police, but you don't actually have proof, then what reason does anyone have to believe you? If the only reason is that they're Nazis and Nazis are violent, then you should avoid them and let the police handle it when it happens, because otherwise you're actively fighting against due process. People are innocent until proven guilty, so just because someone is a Nazi doesn't mean they're guilty of violence until they've actually been violent. So while an open dialogue in the marketplace of ideas might persuade some people, punching will persuade zero. In fact, it might push people away from liberal values, since they will now be able to cry victim. Punching them does not keep their ranks down. In fact, as Sargon of Akkad pointed out in a recent video, some leaders of the alt-right have praised the violence because they see it as a way to get more people to fall into their arms. By being silenced and getting met with violence, they can act like victims and pretend like they're being attacked because no one wants to debate them. But that's obviously not true. There are many who would openly debate them, but often these people are labeled as Nazis or Nazi sympathizers for simply associating with these people. Even though the point of the association is often to debate and disagree with them, this is exactly what's happened to Dave Rubin and Tim Pool, to name just a couple. It's also not an effective way to protect neighborhoods. As Noam Chomsky recently said, in the arena of violence, the most brutal guys win, and that's not us. And I think he is exactly right. The Nazis are not good people at all. Real Nazis will have no issue with killing their enemies. So if you want to fight that with violence, you would best be ready for all-out war. If, on the other hand, you don't think you have what it takes to kill American citizens on US soil, then you should probably refrain from using violence and instead use the law. This will do little to ease the mind of anyone who wishes to rid our communities of these people, unless they've already acted violently or have plans for violence. But it's the best we can do. The other options would be to throw due process out the window and arrest people who haven't committed a crime, or make what they're doing a crime, which just means banning hate speech. But I don't agree with doing that. I think it's a dangerous move to give the government control over what can and can't be said. First, we can't celebrate stupid symbols of oppression, and what's next? Will we ban this stupid symbol of oppression? What about this one? I'm not saying these are morally equivalent to swastikas at all, but the fact is there have been people oppressed by these symbols, and some would consider them to be forces of bad and forces of hate. So unless we have a better way to define a subjective term like hate, then I don't think we should leave that up to the government. So the first reason I don't think we should punch Nazis is that it's pointless. It doesn't change anyone's mind, it doesn't keep their numbers down, it doesn't protect their communities, and according to the alt-right, it actually helps their cause. But that last one can be taken with a grain of salt because the alt-right are wrong about so much. I wouldn't be surprised if they're wrong about this, or anything else for that matter. But that still makes it a pointless task. So now for the second reason why I don't think we should punch Nazis, and that is because the term has been watered down, which I think is a good thing. Some people deal with trauma or pain by joking about it. Because of this, many have used Hitler and Nazis as the butt of many jokes, which has led Nazism to kind of just become a joke in it itself. People even use the term grammar Nazi, which just shows how okay most people are calling others Nazis and not being offended by the implications, because those implications have been watered down and all but removed. When we call someone a grammar Nazi, we're not literally saying that they're committing genocide in the name of grammar. But with how much the term gets thrown around, it doesn't make sense to punch someone for being a Nazi unless you mean literal Nazi. Nothing exemplifies this better than the creator of Rick and Morty, Dan Harmon, going on a rant and saying 29% of the US population are Nazis. I have no clue where this number came from, but I'll give Dan Harmon the benefit of the doubt and not assume it was a cocaine-induced rant where he just made up the number. At first, I thought maybe he was talking about all Trump supporters, but Trump's approval is still like 30 to 40%. But have no fear, because Harmon realized the error of his mistake and apologized to his fans for freaking everyone out for no reason. Oh wait, that's not really what happened at all. He did make a correction on Twitter, but he didn't apologize for the misinformation. Maybe his justification is that he's a comedian and he was trying to be funny, but to me it came off as serious concern. Regardless of his reasons, he did make a correction and accurately stated that 29% of the US are not Nazis, and in fact the number is actually much closer to 1%. In his tweet, he claims that the numbers hadn't actually come in yet, and it's actually only 1% that are Nazis and 28% that just overreact to stuff. And I mean, yeah, I agree to an extent. A lot of people overreact to a lot of stuff, especially jokes. We call those people snowflakes, Dan, and they're all around us. It's usually the left that gets called out for it, but it's not exclusive to one side. Still, though, that doesn't justify calling them all Nazis, unless the point is to water down the term even more. But if that's what you're doing, then why the hell are you calling for civil war? If you want to say 29% of us are Nazis, then you aren't talking about people who deserve to be punched. You're just talking about people who you fundamentally disagree with that are fairly tolerant people. If you instead want to talk about terrible people you might be justified in punching, then you best be damn sure you're talking about actual fucking Nazis. Which, as Dan has now admitted, are not a huge chunk of the population, but instead only a mere 1%. And still, even then, I would not agree with punching them because, as I've already stated, it's pointless. Also, I tried looking up that 29% number, and all I could find is that about 29% of Americans are Democrats, and less than that, about 26% are Republicans. There was a recent poll that found that only about 3% of Americans had a positive view of the alt-right, and about 4% had a positive view of white supremacy, keeping in mind that these two groups have much overlap. So we're talking about only 4% of people who support white supremacy, which means the number of actual white supremacists and the number of actual Nazis is much less than 4%. Another recent poll found that only about 9% of Americans find it acceptable to hold these views. So the number of actual Nazis is probably about 1%, the number who support them is only about 4%, and the number who don't immediately condone them is about 9%, with everyone else being immediately opposed to these people or having no opinion. I suppose maybe he meant all Republicans and just got the numbers wrong, but who knows? I also found that about 29% of the world's population is overweight, and about 29% of Americans take care of loved ones, such as elderly and disabled relatives. Maybe Dan Harmon is confusing obesity with Nazism. But come on, Dan, people aren't fat because they're Nazis. They're fat because they get high and watch Rick and Morty, and then they get the munchies. Or at least that's my problem. I keep seeing this image come back to the idea of tolerating intolerance. There's even an image being shared around social media. This argument only holds true if the words are being used correctly. To tolerate is to allow for the existence of something, so while racism and bigotry are both stupid and hateful, they're not necessarily intolerant. We often use the term in a more loose sense to just mean discrimination, but to truly be intolerant, you must not tolerate, which means you must not allow for the existence of whatever you're being intolerant of. So if I say, I hate you, I'm not being intolerant because I've done nothing to stop you from existing. Similarly, if someone says they hate all of a group, like they hate all Jews, or they hate all white people, or they hate all black people, then they're being a moron, but they aren't necessarily being intolerant. However, if someone makes a threat, then their words can still be intolerant, because a threat is a promise to act. And since we can't know someone's intentions, and can't know if they're being honest, we must assume they'll keep their word, and therefore we must treat the threat as evidence that they plan to act. So for that reason, we must not allow for threats, which is why the courts have ruled that true threats are not protected by the First Amendment. An example of an intolerant group would be ISIS. By terrorizing and killing people, the group has shown that they're willing to take action that is intolerant, by which I literally mean disallowing the existence of those they disagree with, by killing non-believers. However, peaceful Muslims are not intolerant even if they have hatred for other groups such as Jews and Christians, as long as they aren't acting in any way that literally threatens the existence of those people. And even though the source material for Islam is the same source that ISIS used to form their beliefs, most Muslims have not done anything to make them intolerant, and therefore can fit in Western civilization. Similarly, the Nazis that we fought in World War II were intolerant. They rounded up and killed people. The Nazis today aren't doing that. Although maybe it's just because they don't have the power to do so, and if that's the case, then we should uncover that fact and expose it so that it can be met with force. However, until it has been proven that an individual is on board and actively working towards such a plan, it makes no sense to accuse them of such a thing, because otherwise we run the risk of falsely accusing people, and if we give them no time to defend themselves, we take away any chance they have to prove their innocence, which they shouldn't have to do to begin with, since they're Americans and are innocent until proven guilty. To quote Friedrich Nietzsche, "He who fights with monsters might take care lest he thereby become a monster, and if you gaze for long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you." Thanks for watching. Please rate this video and let me know what you think in the comments. You can also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. You can follow me on social media. The links are in the descriptions. Thanks for watching, and remember to never stop questioning.